This coming Monday is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's a commemoration where we usually strive to remember stories of suffering and pain that our co-religionists endured not so long ago. Even as recently as 3 years ago, I would have said it is a day filled only with memory. Something that is imperative to recite, imperative to understand what happened and why we have and had the Holocaust in order to not repeat those same mistakes. I would have offered a sermon quoting Elie Wiesel, and I'll share the quote that I would have given. At the heart of Elie Wiesel's mission as a teacher, this comes from Ariel Berger's book, The Witness, was a phrase his students heard him repeat time and again. Quote, listening to a witness makes you a witness. Like propaganda, its evil twin, moral education is contagious. And to be effective, it must be contagious. Unlike propaganda, though, which tells people what they want to hear or feed their existing fears, moral education tells us what they need to hear, even when it's painful. Here's how you can tell the difference between a false prophet and a true one. Elie Wiesel explained to the class once more, the former comforts, while the latter disturbs. But this sermon is not about memories. It's rather about how are we bearing witness today? How are we choosing to witness the growth over the past decade of anti-Semitism? We can no longer sit and say that Charlottesville, that the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue were isolated incidents. We can sit and listen to proponents of the BDS movement describe the boycott, divestment, and sanction campaign, putting economic pressure to compel Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories and respect the rights of Palestinians as imperative. We can also listen to the critics cite the international campaign is solely aimed at delegitimizing and pressuring Israel through diplomatic, financial, and professional, academic, and cultural means. And today, what do we see? We are witnessing the isolation and delegitimization of the state. If you Google a list of anti-Semitic incidents in the US, there's of course the atrocious lynching of Leo Frank in 1915, or the order given by General Grant during the Civil War. But you can imagine long stretches of not much happening in between Leo Frank in 1915 all the way through the 50s. That's when there was the bombing at the temple in Atlanta. Until 2018, again, breaks in between incidences. Beginning in 2018, anti-Semitic incidences that were major, and what I mean by major is that they were prosecutable and rose to a level of a hate crime, began to happen more and more. Instead of it being once a year, from 2018 till now, it's several times a year. In the middle of January of 2024 of this year, the ADL had tracked a total of 3,283 anti-Semitic incidences from October 7th to January 7th alone. This marked an increase of 361%. And the AJC CEO Ted Deutsch said, if before October 7th, anti-Semitism was a slow-burning fire, it's now become a 5-alarm emergency that requires all of us to douse its flames. We don't need to have programs remembering anti-Semitism. We need to only turn on the television, open our social media apps, and we can see what's happening around us. And so, how do we bear witness? What sense do we want to make of what is happening today is the question that I struggle with. And of course, as a rabbi, I turn to our sacred texts, specifically Lamentations, a book whose putting together happened following the destruction of the first temple. a book whose lack of hope into the future and rawness of suffering suggests that it was actually written in close proximity to that very destruction. When we think about the Hebrew Bible, I want us not, though, to think about a text which defines facts of what happened historically. Instead, the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible in general, constructs narratives or partial narratives designed to elicit a specific or particular theological understanding of those events for edifying purposes. It is a text which strives to create meaning out of extreme things that have happened. It strives to create meaning out of the relationship that we have, not just with ourselves, but with the holy and with God. And when I look at the theological underpinnings, or what it says in the book of Lamentations, it demonstrates, in fact, a wide range of emotions and deep, probing questions. It explores a nation that was reeling from grief, bewilderment, shame, and outrage over the destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. Long-held beliefs that Jerusalem was impenetrable was shattered. And they really began to wonder, where was God? Where was God's protection? And they asked questions like, why was this even happening? The incomprehensibility of what happened has resulted in the evolution of our faith to constantly grapple with deep, challenging questions and the fissure in the relationship between Israel and the divine. And again, what I find absolutely fascinating about the book of Lamentations is that what is explicitly absent in that very book is a list, an inventory of all of the sins that Israel committed. The consistent portrayal of God's nature, of course, recognizable in other biblical books, and a clear notion of how to explain the catastrophic events. Interestingly, also, there's an absence of God's voice along the customary biblical themes indicating the covenantal and enduring relationship between God and our ancestors, along with a description of how God delivered Israel from Egypt, the parental affection that God has for Israel, and the eternal pledge of the Davidic dynasty. It's a book that is full of trauma and the traumatized relationship between Israel and God, and explores how to restore communication with God. What it does offer is a theological grappling. The book acknowledges Israel's sinfulness, but it depicts God as offering excessive punishment and fierce anger. So why am I so referring to Lamentations all of this time? Because I really think in a significant way, it offers us a path of reflection. It offers us how we can frame and makes meaning and sense of what's happening. The book focuses on human ordeals and portrays emotional experience, suggesting the raw human response to suffering is in fact a religious affair, and one that will and can morally shape our character. The book posits that Lamentations is not some sort of Jobian theology exploring the meaning of suffering, rather contains theological reflection. It acknowledges human suffering. It doesn't deny that injustice abounds. The author, at the same time, it doesn't surrender the idea that God runs a world full of justice and the human beings must be responsible for their own deeds. Rather, the theological paradox contained within that very message is that the divine does in fact control the world, but it is a world saturated with injustice and pain. It asks us to live within the complexities of our existence. In other words, it is asking us not to put our head into the sand. It asks us to live in the present moment and requests deeply that we accept the present moment for what it is, not for what we want it to be. Lastly, the book imagines a future. There are various illusions throughout the parts of the book to Deuteronomy, specifically Deuteronomy chapter 28, where there is a covenantal relationship between God and the people of Israel. And according to those tenets, Israel is obligated to obey God, and if it doesn't receive God's blessing. By observing God's commandments and in doing, God promises a myriad of those blessings, and it also enumerates the specific punishments that we are to endure for disobedience. But the linguistic parallels between Lamentations and in Deuteronomy highlight how there is, in fact, a reciprocal relationship. How even if we go off the path, even if we are sinful, even if we are disobedient, even if we don't follow the commandments, we can get back on the path, get back into the covenantal relationship. We can still wonder and rebuke and chastise, but we can still reconcile, heal, and grow. It is not our fault that we are living in these challenging times. I am not a victim, neither are you. It is not our fault that this is happening to us. We did not request any of this. We didn't start the conflict on October 7th. We didn't ask to be the focus of ire by anti-Semites, either from the left or the right. There are 15 million Jews in the world for a reason. That's it, just 15 million. And we must acknowledge some painful truths. The anti-Zionism that we see is a form of anti-Semitism. And we must honor our pain around all of it. We must mourn the shattered feelings that we have since there is a break in the peaceful coexistence which we once enjoyed and thrived in. And we must comfort ourselves as we sit in disbelief. We need to reimagine ourselves as living by our values of treating everyone as if they are created in the image of God, even if there are moments when we want to be reactionary. We must live by those values at all times. And during this challenging period, we must remember that this is yet another example of the 2,000-year-old painful truth that is infamously written into the Haggadah itself, because in each generation they rise up against us to destroy us. But that just tells me once again, we are not alone. We are linked with those that came before us. And just like them, we will grow. We will become stronger. We will be part of a solution to once again involve and live and enhance the world around us by living a morally just and equitable way. Shabbat Shalom.